So as you may have noted from our session description, our conversation today perpetuates the TLC focus of empathy, advocacy, and non-traditional student success into a discussion with our special guests and experts from UHEC and Purdue's Global Campus, specifically drawing from their experiences in the Equity and Retention Academy at the Gardner Institute. Our panelists will comment on the role of continuous reflection in specific academic and operational areas of their institution, and how this work really needs to press forward to ensure equity in strategies for improving student persistence. For those unfamiliar with the Gardner Institute and the Equity and Retention Academy, we call it EIRA. EIRA is a structured 5-week academy that prepares institutions to assess and understand their equity indicators and develop a deliverable, a plan to plan on how to construct an intentional retention plan, one that is focused on an equity lens for their institutions and populations. So I really want to welcome all of our attendees at this session today. And in particular, I also welcome our Gardner mentors that had made time to come and join us this afternoon. Now, before I introduce you to our panelists, it's important for me to note that the EIRA team here at UHEC was comprised of many others than you see here. And these folks continue to give their time and expertise to the EIRA retention effort. In addition to the panelists here at UHEC, the UHEC team includes Tricia Lauer, Vice President of Assessment and Curricular Affairs, Dr. Mingzhen Bao, Director of the Academic Engagement Center, Dr. Marie Henderson, Director, Delivery Unit, Dr. Amir Elokemi, I'm sorry if I mispronounced last name, Amir, Assistant Professor, Forbes School of Business and Technology, and a strong voice for faculty on our team. Dr. Nettles, Vice President, Office of Institutional Effectiveness, and Christina Jaquez, Student Conduct Officer and Deputy Title IX Coordinator, and just overall advocate for our students. And now I'm pleased to introduce you to our panelists. Dr. Pelletier is Executive Director, Academic Administration at Purdue Global. She has served Kaplan Purdue University Global since 2009 and is currently the Executive Director of Academic Administration. She leads the Center for Teaching and Learning, Faculty Operations, Student Life, and Academic Success Center teams. Patty has served as an academic dean, an academic department chair, and a faculty member. She holds a doctorate of educational leadership and curriculum and instruction, a Master of Science in Higher Education, College Administration and Leadership, a Master of Arts in Education, and a graduate certificate in Human Resources. In addition to her education, Patty has over 36 years in the field of education, with 18 years devoted to higher ed. She lives in Maine with her husband, 3 sons, 2 grandchildren. I need to eat what you're eating, Patty. 2 grandchildren and 2 fur babies. Dr. Kristen Early is the Director of Inclusive Excellence and Strategic Initiatives within the Office of Organizational Culture and Inclusive Excellence at Purdue University Global. She's been with Purdue Global since 2009, previously serving as a faculty member in the Graduate Public Safety Program. I love your background, Kristen, and what you bring as a research criminologist. You have dedicated your career to examining systematic inequities in the American justice system. In the wake of recent concerns over police brutality and racial bias, Dr. Early collaborated with a team at Purdue to revise curricula to examine law enforcement practices and accountability through the lens of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And along those lines, developed graduate level curricula on inclusive leadership in public safety. She served as a member of the steering committee for the Purdue University West Lafayette Equity Task Force, and as the co-chair of that equity task force. She also, in these roles, advanced DEI efforts by developing strategic plans, success metrics, analyzing student and faculty composition, and persistence data. In this, she participated in the Gardner Institute's Equity and Retention Academy and is co-authoring the initial Purdue Global Institutional Retention Plan. And sure enough, you may have heard my Alexa in the background, but our Alexa at UAGC, Alexa Dunn, has been with the university since November 2013 and currently serves as Associate Director, Articulation and Prior Learning Assessment. With the bulk of her tenure in the matriculation department, Alexa developed a deep knowledge of transfer credit that set her up to move into articulation in 2019. Since then, Alexa has worked with internal and external partners to develop and enhance our academic partnerships. Alexa is responsible for the development and execution of articulation agreements and transfer guides and oversees credit for prior learning at UAGC. Alexa has a Bachelor of Music and Sound Recording Technology from the University of Massachusetts at Lowell and earned her MBA from UAGC. Notably, Alexa has been a very strong contributor to our ERA team. She's a constant force in assuring UAGC's team is informed, resourced, and present, especially throughout the 5 weeks that we spent at the institution. And last, I'm introducing our Dr. Teresa Couric, AVP of Faculty Affairs. Teresa and her team are responsible for directing and operationalizing this TLC. She has 15 years of experience in higher education, including teaching upper division, undergraduate foreign language, culture, and literature courses at The Ohio State University, Indiana University, San Diego State University, and the University of California, San Diego, Go Tritons, and managing outreach for academic programs at Ohio State and UCSD. Teresa earned a PhD in comparative literature from UC San Diego. She has an MA in Russian literature and a BA in Russian, both from the Ohio State University. Most recently, UAGC has embraced Teresa's precision with language and writing, and we have effectively channeled her gifts into our accreditation and regulatory needs. So these are our esteemed panelists, and I'm going to go ahead and start our conversation by asking Purdue, what has been and what was your motivation for applying to the EIRA Gardner Institute? Would you share with us?
Sure, I'll start. And thank you so much for all of that, Iris. So our interest in the application to the Equity and Retention Academy stemmed from some work that we did with PG Moves. And I'm going to just give you a little bit of detail on what that is, but not a lot, because that's something that we've done in our own university. But I have to give you that background to see how we actually came into this academy. And so the Purdue Global Moves, we officially launched that in June of 2021, which obviously was before we started the academy this last spring. And those moves included 4 strategic initiatives designed to help the university meet its goals. And those were in student success, professional skills, classroom of the future, and equity. Diversity, equity, and inclusion were woven into our PG Moves to achieve overarching goals of equitable representation, opportunity, inclusion, and accountability. And the student success, professional skills, and classroom of the future pieces also included those equitable opportunities for students, faculty, and staff. So that's kind of the background there. And the mission of the Purdue Global Equity Task Force. That was Kristen and I were both I think they called us, Kristen, co-champions. But we were those two individuals that led that equity task force for these PG moves. And what we did was foster a multicultural community of learning by expanding the diversity of students, faculty, and staff, promoting a collective sense of belonging and inclusion, and also ensuring equitable access to and advance through and beyond Purdue University Global. So we also were involved with Gardner Institute because of our relationship and collaboration with Purdue University. So we had a connection there. So between our PG moves and our connections with Gardner University, it was kind of a natural step for us to proceed and continue into this opportunity from the Gardner Institute, which was the Equity and Retention Academy. Hopefully that helps a little.
That certainly does help, and I'm curious too, because I know had it was tricky for us to just select a handful that we thought here of our colleagues would have the bandwidth to go ahead and participate in the 5-week intensive institution. So how did you select who was included on your team, and what roles were included? Would you do anything differently?
Okay, so I'll start with the first piece of that question, and it is always difficult. It seems like or at least in our university, and maybe Iris in yours as well, that you have the same group of people that always are those people that are so motivated to get involved in new initiatives. But we decided that we were going to be very intentional and not select those individuals. We selected some, but what our main focus is that we wanted individuals across the university, of course, that had this perspective that we needed from many different lenses. So we looked at all those individuals throughout the university and selected representatives from all the schools. And not just one type or one role. We selected vice presidents, we selected deans, associate deans, faculty, and staff. So it was all different people with different perspectives. And then we also looked outside of the academic piece and looked at student life, co-curricular perspective, academic administration, career advancement, our Center for Career Advancement. We looked at curriculum and brought all of those people in together. The second part, I believe you asked, was what would we maybe include or do differently when we did that selection? I think what we would have done after reflecting on those choices is adding maybe one additional department to the list of folks that we brought in. And that would be the Office of Reporting and Analysis. And you might smile on that one because I don't know if you brought that kind of person in, but we didn't. And our purpose was to understand the root causes and promising practices to retain our students and analyze the data we had available. And there we go, analyze. So we were missing that direct person on our group to be able to immediately or easily tell us what this data meant, where we could find the data, and all of that. And we didn't have that. Now, of course, we did find it, and we did go out and go get some people from that office and then bring it back to our group and do that analysis. But I think it would have been much smoother for us if we would have had that individual on our team from the beginning.
Thank you, Patty. That is a great lesson learned. And, in talking with our team here, we did include our Office of Institutional Effectiveness. So we had our key Dr. Nettles with us. However, because there's a meta aspect to this entire institute and developing a plan to plan, in fact, that does not leave anyone out. And I think I'm just going to say for us, I wish, first of all, we could include anyone that was interested. And particularly, I think UAGC would include additional faculty members to assure that that voice was equally as strong. But I know too that one of the goals of our conversation today is really to have each institution share an overview of the deliverable, which is a plan to plan, and that sharing that will help our participants here, our attendees, understand how each of our institutions are really hoping to engage everybody at the schools to participate. So if I may start at UAGC, the EIRA team drafted an equity and retention mission statement. And that one incorporated elements of the institution's equity and mission statements to address access to and success in learning. So in addition, the UAGC plan to plan, which is, by the way, readying for its debut at an executive leader meeting in this near future, our plan to plan articulates a planning process and mechanism for upholding retention statements by addressing inequities that limit student success opportunities. Key to this mechanism is consistent analysis across the institution, and that includes analysis of critical information about the student experience through the lens of student voice, and also through looking at relevant disaggregated data related to student behaviors and outcomes. And we are both data-rich institutions, so we really had to take time to think about what this means, the data that we have. We also, in our plan to plan at UAGC, outlined 3 critical purposes to make sure that the mechanism was consistent in its analysis. So the 3 critical purposes includes an establishment at the institution of understanding the different kinds of data, and informing so that we could recalibrate and or reprioritize existing student success initiatives as part of continuous work. So it's part of continuous work to maintain equitable practices. And then also third, to necessitate equity-driven decision-making, decisions that are made upon developments in advising, in curriculum, and in other policy practices. Now, I recognize that that's a lot, but what I really hope that to communicate is that we have a plan to propose how to move our retention practices forward. And so, Teresa, I think about you and your contribution to our EIRA team. In this plan, we had designated a total of 5 steps, actually, and those steps began with reflection. Would you comment on the importance of reflection that our plan to plan recommends?
Sure, I'd be happy to. I think we all have read in learning theory of the importance of the reflection process to learning in and of itself. And I think specifically at UAGC, we have a wonderful combination asset and challenge. And that is our ability to scale work very quickly and broadly. That is an asset because we can test out our hypotheses, we can put into place helpful programs that we know will address urgent needs very quickly. And it's a challenge because sometimes that speed causes us to focus more on operations than on other very important facets of these student success initiatives. So the first step, I think, for everyone in our institution's EIRA group was to acknowledge that asset and then pause and think, what are we missing in our understanding of the origins, the purposes, and then the impacts, whether they are intended or not, of all of this important student success work that we've put into place. What questions do we need to ask of this work? Who do we need to ask? What assumptions did we have going into the work that we need to question, or definitions of terms do we need to redefine in order to ensure that our well-intended student success work isn't inadvertently leaving any group of students behind.
Thank you, Teresa. And I mean, even there, I think we've made some strides because we have taken time to think, actually. And I want to go ahead and turn to Patty and Kristen to ask them about their plan to plan. Would you sketch that out for us here? And now that too, we have the context of your PG moves, maybe comment as well in the sketching of any specific relationships there that you see. So those are two big questions. I'll go ahead and I'm all ears.
Thank you, Iris. Yeah, I'm happy to do that. I'm going to kind of follow the same pattern that you outlined. I think we all were particularly thankful for the instruction that we got from the Gardner Institute to really consider what our retention statement was, because honestly, we did not have one. And it was, oh, okay, yeah, we need to really reflect on what this means to us. And that was done fairly early on. And that was a great thing because, like you, it really kind of drove where we wanted to go from there. And so our group came up with a pretty short, succinct statement that Purdue Global will ensure that all students, faculty, and staff are provided with equitable access and support to succeed in developing personalized academic and professional outcomes. So we wanted to kind of cover the gamut, but we really wanted to focus in on equitable access and equitable support along the way. And as you said, we had the PG moves that preceded this. And I will also mention that before that, Purdue University had set their own moves agenda and had implemented their equity task force. And I participated on that. And so that was very helpful, giving us kind of a foundation from the on the ground approach. And when Teresa just mentioned about being very nimble, that's one thing that we noticed right away is, yes, we have the ability to maybe move a tiny bit faster and be able to, get together a group and a task force and start to move quickly. But sometimes in that process, just as you all noted, you sometimes get ahead of yourself and you don't realize that you might be missing important gaps. So our focus then was to try to zero in on policies and actions that may not be supporting retention equity the way we thought it was or should be. And so for us, we came up with kind of 3 questions / turning them into kind of directives, but we wanted to see what are our opportunities for identifying systemic structural gaps that we may have across the university as it relates to diversity, as it relates to equity, inclusion, and belonging. We also wanted to really come up then, as we started to identify gaps, with an actionable plan that would really attempt to address these issues and do it for not just our students, but we know that faculty and staff are integral to creating that culture, that community of belonging. And so we knew that was critical. And it was also critical to look at the culture of faculty and staff as well. And then we wanted to align that plan along the pillars that we had initially come up with as part of the Equity Task Force, which looked at representation. So here we're looking at the composition, if you will, of the faculty, staff, and students. The next pillar was opportunity. what opportunities do we have, or could we expand for students, faculty, and staff to access Purdue Global? Then moving on into inclusion for our third, which obviously getting into that community of belonging and how we can foster that community in an online environment. And then finally, our fourth pillar, really designed to drive the other three, was accountability. Holding ourselves accountable to be transparent in our work, as well as to set success metrics that would then drive each element of the plan.
This may be a funny or even unfair question, because we have both institutions, it sounds, have really wanted to and purposefully leaned into data at some level, right? But before that, there are some hunches, right, that make us look for those pockets of evidence. Anyone? I'm going to open it up to our four panelists here. Were there any hunches that you personally believe, we need to start looking at this particular system, as Kristen, you mentioned a particular gap. What were the hunches?
I'll be happy to go. I think, I was thinking, Patty, when you were introducing us to why Purdue Global participated in the ERA Academy, you talked about, critical institutional goals that, Purdue had set and that Purdue Global was also adopting. And it made me think, over the past year or so, don't quote me because I'll probably get the time frame wrong, but UAGC has refined our institutional mission statement, and it includes so much more than just the academic experience. I think that mission statement really clearly articulates our hunch that there's something else that's maybe difficult to define, that's impacting our students, kind of amorphous things like belonging, mental health, self-efficacy, motivation. And so those are really big general topics, but that hunch prompted us to seek guidance to make it more concrete. And that's what ERA has helped us to do.
I can lean into that, Teresa. I feel that same hunch, and the broadness as you think of it, of that, I actually think of Alexa, because Alexa in other conversations has said, I think these are areas that we are actually excluding, not just academic areas, but we're actually excluding students. We're excluding learners by virtue of the way we call things or categorize things. So I'm going to ask Alexa. Alexa, can you comment on where in processes or naming that we at UAGC may be excluding students?
Yeah, I think this is a really interesting question overall. And coming into this academy, I feel like I was sort of a wild card chosen to join a team that definitely has been involved with things like this before, whereas I hadn't. And going into it, I very much looked at it as an opportunity to say, I've been volunteered. So someone saw something in me and said, hey, Dr. Lafferty, this person might be able to help you. And I take that sort of responsibility seriously to then bring my voice and to speak up. I think there's a few areas that are potentially missed, and students is a very huge piece of that. But to take a very quick step back, we're a very big institution, and we've been doing things in a lean way for a long time. People are very good at their jobs. Our processes are very streamlined. We get stuff done very quickly for students when they have, anything from an academic leave request, having a different class scheduled. We're very quick at doing those things, but with that, it may have, especially coming from the administrative side of things and not having been in the academics, I do see that there's a huge gap on sort of our side where over the past year and a half, we've seen all of these sort of initiatives come out, and they tend to be very focused on the academic side. And I think if we bring in more people like myself and other individual contributors, some of the examples, the power of one and turning the tide and the culture of care, and getting everyone involved in those things at a sort of more organic, lower level is going to definitely help them take root on both sides. But everything we've done, we used to have a lot more student feedback surveys go out, at least from my point of view, it felt like we did. And as we went into this and we looked at all of this data, of which we have copious amounts, one of the things that was missing really was student feedback. We've implemented multiple things over the past 2 years that were to try and help students. And where was the data coming back from them to say how it helped them and how it didn't help other students? And getting that real personal connection. One of the sort of paradoxical things from this entire experience is we have all of this cold hard data that we need to sit down, disaggregate, really dive into the numbers. But at the end of the day, it's really about the culture of belonging and how does a student actually feel about it. And so how do you quantify a feeling, and how do you get that feedback, and how do we source that and incorporate it into the plans as we move forwards? So I think very much, I probably said it multiple times as we were developing our plan to plan, was someone needs to figure out how we incorporate this student voice. Like, do we do a count, and other people had the suggestions, do we do a student council? Do we do surveys? Do we do XYZ, all of the above? And I'm very excited to see how that does evolve over time. And I think that getting that personal touch and that personal connection with our students is going to help just overall in everything that we do with them, the UAGC community.
Alexa, that your voice actually did turn the team to looking even more deeply as to how we might look and gather and understand student voice, and beginning to think of that as one of the depleted resources that we have. I agree, and I turn to our Purdue Global friends and want to ask the same thing. Do you have concerns or an interest in gaining student feedback, even more so than what you're already doing in your practices today?
Yeah, absolutely. We can echo those same concerns. We too, just as you do, have so much data, and we often look at things at an institutional level, and we realized, one, we need to be looking at measures across graduation, retention, persistence, enrollment, outreach to accessibility services. And we need to be doing it in terms of looking at our different demographic groups and what's occurring with those different demographic groups, and what can the trends tell us. But that's just not enough. We need to then know, when we do see trends, why it's happening, and to better understand, for example, if students are withdrawing, why are they withdrawing? We don't necessarily know, right? And if they are encountering issues along the way, what were those touch points that we might have proactively been able to kind of change that trajectory for them if we had qualitative data? So we are actually in the process of developing our first campus climate survey. And we look forward to hopefully being able to administer that this year, and give us a better sense of how we're doing across all of the different touch points that students come in contact with, so that we can get a better sense of where we can improve our resources and our responses for students, but also for faculty and staff. So we will be administering it as well at those levels, so we can get some additional feedback in those regards as well.
You've made me think about, earlier today, we heard Clint Smith at his fireside chat remind the group there about the critical need to look at hidden histories, legacies, the structures that we have. He was talking about it at a societal level, I believe, but for us at the institutions, you call it the first campus climate survey. So it makes me think about any of the language, I continue to think about any of the language or categorization barriers that might go into that survey. Do we think that, are we calling those demographic pools the right things? Like when we say military student, is that including the right folks? Or if we say transfer student, do these categories need to be better defined in surveys as the climate survey or in data that we pull back as an institution? So Kristen, I offer that to you or to Alexa to comment on, how we categorize. Is it enough? Is it right? Should anything be changed?
Yeah, I'll just offer that one of the things that we did as we started to consider our campus climate survey was to look at other campus climate surveys that had been used across the nation, predominantly used on the ground, right? And predominantly with definitions that just simply didn't fit and didn't apply. And with a lot of questions that also don't apply, given the fact that we don't have the in-person classroom experience, and that experience looks different. And some of the things that we would be interested in on the ground might not even think about as being important. So that has become a real critical focus for us to determine what those definitions are, and also to collaborate with you all and others like us so that we can come to some consistency across our universities and be able to kind of have nice benchmarking across our groups to really get a sense of how we're doing over time. So that's really a critical thing for us right now.
I think the idea of working with each other as an industry is extremely important. One of the things that I kind of echo the idea that we need societal change across the board, that everything that we currently have in society was built on a very specific way of hierarchical status. But within higher education, one of the sort of eye-opening pieces of data for myself, which it wasn't something I had looked at before, but I generally knew about it, was really seeing the trends between the current definitions of the full-time, first-time students, splitting it up by your gender or your race, and seeing how we were able to look at the same data for peers of various, we had 10 different institutions we were able to, 5 were provided to us and 5 we chose, and we were able to see the same sort of dip from, a white female to an African-American female. The men, it was really just this sort of U-shaped curve, depending the way it was on my screen, at least presented. And to see that same thing across all 11 institutions, including ourselves, was very sort of, we're obviously as an entire industry not helping these students. And in order to make it better, we are going to have to strip it back and go down to the bare minimum and build it back up again. In terms of language and terminology, one of the things over the past year, especially as I have sort of taken on the prior learning assessment department and really dived in and learned a lot, is that industry standard language is going to be essential. So there are definitely some terms and phrases that can negatively impact a student when they hear them. Something that we we recently reevaluated our academic watch policy. Imagine being a student, like you're on academic watch. How negative can that be? How can we mitigate that? And so that was just one example of a negative. But in a positive light, we're very much trying to ensure that the data we're presenting for articulation and prior learning assessment is actually the data that people are asking for by using the same terms. So the way that we define PLA, prior learning assessment, is not actually the same way that the Council of Adult and Experiential Learning do. So they're trying to implement this credit for prior learning, which means any type of non-traditional learning. So if it's not from a college, not from an accredited institution, that's traditional credit. Everything else is this credit for prior learning. We here at UAGC, we define that as non-traditional credit. And then within that, we have a bunch of sort of sub-pools, including what we call UAGC PLA, which is whatever doesn't come in with all of these other broad sections that we accept. So in terms of the language and the terminology, one of the ideas that came up with our team was really looking at the terms we are using, even within like our mission statement and a proposed equity statement. What is an adult learner? How do we actually define this? Because if I have a different definition in my brain, I will be approaching a solution or a thought with a different bias of some sort. So I think that was one of the big things for me from our plan to plan, was really evaluating what we've done in the past, what we currently have going, and determining the data behind it. And then also really diving down. There were a few examples of web pages that actually have definitions of various terms, and I was just fascinated by those. And I would love to see us also go that route and really make sure that we are not just with ourselves, but with Patty and Kristen and other participants, and then hopefully a broader, the broader community as a whole sort of start determining what those definitions are so that we can define the new normal. As the online institution, we're not the previous norm. We're not full-time first-time students predominantly. And so these classifications and these ways that we are defining and being held accountable to are not necessarily fitting our student body and the people that we serve.
Thank you, Alexa. I can't underscore how much the language and anything that disenfranchises our students by either, these are not purposeful things, right? These are historical artifacts that I agree. We piled together to go ahead and chip away at. And you had also mentioned, what are we doing now? What have we done in the past, and what can we adhere to? I am curious. I'd like to ask Patty and Teresa about, we've got this quest to best serve our learners. I know this at both our institutions, and both of our universities are so prone, as Teresa, you've mentioned, to rapid change, and which often leads to multiple initiatives, just competing with each other and yet trying to attain the same goals. Have you seen, the work that we've started with the Gardner Institute? How has the Gardner Institute and the Plan to Plan complemented and or helped to inform existing retention efforts at the institution? And Patty, you hinted at this with the Purdue strategies earlier, but are there specific areas that you might want to highlight to say, look, we were starting doing this, walked into the institute and walked away with either, a better way to approach this thing that was already at the institution?
Sure. I think I'll go with what Alexa was talking about a little bit, and that academic watch. We don't call it academic watch, but I can understand how that could be intimidating for students. And I think that's Probably one of the things that, we had 4 things that we really looked at. It's where we lost students. And, one of those is in that academic integrity piece. Probation's one, incomplete grades are another. There's all different reasons, but we were looking for why or when we lose students. And one of them is academic integrity. And I've got to go on the language thing too, before I give you more of the example is students have a really hard time when they have these negative words brought to them. And Alexis said it, it's the academic watch. Oh no, they're watching me. And they feel like they're under a microscope and they're not going to do anything right. But think about the words we use. We use academic charge, or you have a violation, or you're on probation, or it's you have to do an appeal. I feel like I'm in a judge and jury right now, or in Kristen's field, criminal justice, right? But that's where and so that what it does, it makes people crawl into, underneath their desk or under a rock and go, okay, I'm not going to say another word, just go ahead and do what you're going to do to me. And we lose students, and it might be for very innocent reasons. And it might be that they need just different words. And we had a discussion just the other day when we were talking about academic integrity, because at the institution, we looked at this, and what the academy did for us is make us look at things and look at it a little deeper. And why are we losing so many students? So attach that additional information to it, the demographics. And we did that during the actual academy and got the report after the academy was over. And Kristen and I have looked at it, and a few other people went, oh my. And then we had like 10 other questions of, but why are we looking at some disparities here? And why are some groups having more charges than others? And what can we look at and change to be able to help people and have this learning center type process rather than this intimidation type process? And I've never thought about that wording before, but once we started digging down and ferreting down into the details, now we're looking at things a little differently. And so we right now are in a group. We have one large group that is looking at the policy of 2 different parts of academic integrity. One is the code of conduct, and then the other is the plagiarism piece. And we're looking at, we need to train our faculty better. We're being inconsistent, and maybe if we're more consistent, then we're going to have better outcomes for our students. And that's pretty easy. That's low-hanging fruit that we can do right now. We have the tools. It's just a matter of implementing it across the university equitably. Everybody has the information and making sure. So what we're thinking of doing, we still haven't gone the whole way through it, is to have that as a required piece for all faculty, so that they understand what the policy is and how they should help and use teachable moments. And don't get me wrong, plagiarism, very serious. And we don't want our students taking other people's work and saying it's their own. But a lot of our students just don't know what they did wrong, and we're losing them because we're not being very sensitive to what our language is, how we're approaching it, and having good conversations with our students. So, I think that's one small example. We've had another one, and I could probably go on. I think this one panel could go on for at least an hour or two, and everybody's not here that long. But that's one example that the Institute helped us, or excuse me, the Academy helped us dive a little bit more into, and we are really working quite a bit on that right now.
It sounds like in many ways, Patty, we live parallel lives, truly. And I'm looking at Teresa now, because you did mention faculty development and faculty training, and that of course is her charge here at the institution. And so Teresa, I wonder from what Patty has mentioned, if anything resonates with you with regard to what we have learned from the Gardner Institute, from the Academy, that you could bring and would like to, in the blink of an eye, bring to our faculty as a nugget of training.
Yeah. Well, I think I want to riff a little bit on what Patty said about low-hanging fruit, right? Because these are all of these topics we're talking about are overwhelming almost. We are out to solve really big issues. And I think the influence, at least in my sphere, my observations of the Gardner Academy or the Gardner Institute, sorry, or the ways that we're reflecting at our institution, the work that we did there, are on two levels. So within the past 2 years, especially, UAGC has put a lot of effort into prioritizing and focusing a handful of student success initiatives that are based in, research-based practices, specifically high impact institutional practices, things like synchronous, live learning sessions, peer mentoring, for example. And I think for those two as examples, lessons learned at Gardner about reframing how we are looking at data. We know the literature has told us that these practices are effective, can be effective. So we need to dig deeper to understand how they're panning out at our institution and why. So I can say, and I see leaders for both of these initiatives in the attendees, so please weigh in the chat. For our live learning, for example, the leaders of that initiative and those who support it have observed, students of color, students who are working full-time tend not to be able to participate in these activities as they stood. And so they added different types of sessions, different timing of sessions to create more opportunities for these students and have seen progress in their attendance, right? For peer mentoring, for example, you have a set of very motivated students who voluntarily participate, but students who we would really love to touch aren't as engaged or able to participate. So again, digging into that data to see where that's happening, with whom, and maybe why, then prompted a refinement of that program to offer group mentoring in a different time frame and a different environment, and that has had positive impact. So on a data level, that has been very helpful for us. The higher level, and Iris, this is where this idea about deconstruction came to mind. I don't know if anyone's familiar with Derrida's deconstruction theory, but essentially it's going through an exercise of breaking down something that you think you know into its component parts and realizing what the actual underlying meaning is. So in the context of literature, for example, you often find out that the actual meaning of the thing isn't even necessarily what the author or the speaker intended. Overall, I think that's what we're doing here. And a perfect example of that, and this is where I'm coming back to the low-hanging fruit, is the Culture of Care initiative. Whereas some other student success initiatives have a lot of technical operational aspects that would impact our students' engagement with them, Culture of Care truly is asking just each individual to find their own opportunity to deconstruct their understanding of higher education terms, what they mean to our students, what they actually look like for our students, our understandings of ourselves as instructors, as student support staff, as administrators, deconstruct all of it and put it back together and realize where the lesson is for us and how we can change our individual practice. So that's a cultural change that I think ERA kind of is supporting or encouraging. That makes it all the more complicated because it is on an individual level, but also all the more achievable because it's an exercise we each can do. Learning technology aside, policies aside, et cetera, is something we each can take responsibility for.
So the background to this, I just have to share with the group here, and we're just a few minutes away from closing, but Teresa and I were texting back and forth, and she said yesterday, do you think that literature theory has a place in our conversation tomorrow at this panel? And I said, absolutely, because my eldest one is a lit theory grad student. So of course that makes sense to me. But as I think about it, I actually think of the work here too, in addition, as a gestalt. So here's my psychology side. So I see the gestalt, I see the big picture and the pieces, but you're right, the pieces and parts. And I'm actually writing this into a homework assignment I have from Joe Kappa and Brian Elward in the development of our provost department page. I think we have the responsibility of the gestalt of the student experience, but you're right, Teresa, the responsibility really sits in our individual roles and what we can contribute in the close reading of where that work really can resonate and make a difference to change the picture of the student journey. I have selfishly taken quite a bit of time. We have about 4 minutes. I want to continue to invite our participants, our attendees, to pop questions into the chat, but also since there are 4 minutes, if each of our 4 panelists might take a minute and just share what fingerprint would you hope to impart in the retention, impart on your teams in your institution regarding the retention experience with the Gardner Institute? So I'll go ahead and I'll start with Alexa. Give me your 1 minute.
I was hoping I'd be last. I think a fingerprint, I've been very open with my team about what I was doing and when, so that they knew why I wasn't necessarily there for them. I think one of the important things is that our current leadership is extremely focused on looking at all of these issues we've had for basically the entire time we've been an institution, and trying to find a new way of doing it. And in a lot of, not just at the EIRA, which was very eye-opening for me personally, but being in some leadership meetings and hearing them talk, this focus on the student and reminding them about, we see what we do every day, all day, every day. The students don't, and the student is brand new. They might not have ever heard the word before, never done the process before. Let's treat them as that one person, not as part of a student body whole number. So really getting down to that one individual.
Thank you. Patty?
So I think Kristen and I both thought about this because, of course, we had this question from you earlier. So if you don't mind, I'm going to pass it to Kristen first so I don't steal her thunder, and then I'll wrap it up after that.
Sure.
So Kristen, please.
No problem. One of the things that collectively as a EIRA group that we really concluded at the end of the 5 weeks was that this is not just a one-off exercise. This really has to be an ongoing commitment that will be a continuous cycle. We saw it not just as an opportunity, but really as an obligation. So we felt that we were obligated to strategically plan and to set forth very transparent on the website success metrics and the extent to which we meet those metrics. We also knew, and we put right in there, that we knew we had to put funding towards our DEI and belonging efforts. We just, it has to be there to drive our goals. And we really felt that it was important that we collaborate not just within our community, but also we consider the communities that our students are living in and coming to us from. We consider the larger community of our Purdue University system and our other branches and collaboration in those regards. And that's become a wonderful thing that we never had until after Gardner, and we are now all collaborating. So for me, that's been a wonderful outcome of this, is increased collaboration and communication across our different levels.
Wonderful. And Teresa, if, I appreciate that. And Patty, did you want to add?
See, this is why I gave it to Kristen. Do you see? It was no, and the only thing I want to just emphasize is that the collaboration between us as individuals and institutions has been very rewarding. And I think bringing all of those people in together in that academy actually opened up the doors for us to have more conversations. So that's really what I really enjoyed doing and taking away from the academy, because it did open some doors, and I'm very appreciative of the collaboration with you all. And I know that we'll continue that. And so I think that's what a lot of people miss, because they're like, okay, I'm protecting all of this and you all can't know what I'm doing. And that's not what we should be doing. We should be trying to collaborate together and get back, share those best practices and things like that. But Kristen says it so much more eloquently than I do. So.
Well, and I'm grateful for our conversations, truly, and you certainly are a model team to work with. I see that we are losing our folks, but the conversation will continue on the platform and behind the scenes. I just thank everyone here, the panelists, attendees, and folks from the Gardner Institute for your participation today, and certainly to our panelists. Thank you, Kristen and Patty, Teresa, Alexa. We are appreciative of you. Thank you.